RJ Barrett has had to work exceptionally hard to overcome the bust tag he's earned in New York. But is RJ Barrett better than we think? Despite being a big part of the turnaround in the culture in New York, Knicks fans and media have made no secret of the fact that they wanted him gone. Well, he's home now, and home cooking is different. RJ was the number one player in the country for Montverde for the number one prep program in 2019. The pandemic did hit, but after a productive freshman season at Duke, where he averaged 22.6 points, 7.6 rebounds, and 4.6 assists, while being one of the best players in the country with an 8.6 box plus minus, despite being on the same team as Zion Williamson, he went third to New York in the 2020 draft. And amidst expectations that his weaknesses at Duke would be fixed at the NBA level, he struggled. And indeed, he was not a perfect player at Duke at all. 53% true shooting, 66% free throw shooter, 30% three-point shooter. RJ had a lot of work to do, and some feel he did not do that work in New York. He failed to improve in areas where fans were most critical of: defense, shooting, playmaking, and finishing around the rim. He was miscast as a third option and deficient as a first option, and the narrative around him went from extreme hype to extreme critique. He was deemed as a toxic asset. RJ spent the last year proving haters wrong. Under Darko Rajakovic and the Toronto Raptors, RJ Barrett retained some hope of regaining that shine he once had as a prospect. He is a month removed from his 24th birthday. I repeat, he is 24 years old. He just turned 24. He is coming off his first ever positive box plus minus stint in the NBA. Last year, just barely clearing zero with a positive 0.1. That is a positive development for a player who had largely been a negative his entire career. And yes, he is 24. He is younger than Ochai Agbaji, Emmanuel Quickley, Davion Mitchell, as well as rookie Brandon Carlson. Is it too late to expect a superstar? Maybe. But an all-star? We can talk about that. I was looking at a graph of points generated relative to field goals attempted, ranking out the best and most and least efficient scorers in the NBA over the last 10 years. RJ was firmly on the downside of that, heading right into DeMar DeRozan and Russell Westbrook territory. On the middle, it was guys like Kawhi Leonard, and on the high end, it was guys like Steph, LeBron, and Jokic. But something happened to RJ's shot chart last year in Toronto. It turned upside down. The downward trend that he had been on for years, for the first time ever, clicked up. This happens sometimes. Let's see if it can continue. This live was also going to discuss the Raptors lineup for next season, barring trades and signings, who the Raptors' fifth starter should be between Grady Dick, Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown, and perhaps rookie Jacoby Walter. And finally, before this live ends, we are going to rate all 12 of the Raptors' youngest prospects and figure out who has the absolute highest upside among them before getting to any questions and super chats. Please hit like and subscribe on your way in as we inch ever closer to 11,000 subscribers. Likes go a long way in terms of letting other Raptor fans know how to find this content. Okay, welcome. Another scripted intro. That one probably was a little bit bumpy. I was up until, I want to say it was like close to 6 a.m. with Ox on Big Ox Media on the graveyard shift. That was really fun. Definitely go and check that out, especially if you're into social issues and issues in America. We talked about a lot of cool stuff. I want to make a big shout out before this live starts. When we start talking about RJ Barrett, I want to say thank you to Too Fast for You. This right here was such an unexpected and beautiful surprise from Amazon wishlist earlier on. This is such like this. I'll talk about it later at the end of this live. I made a community post about all the support that y'all have been pouring into this. And it's not just financial support. It's just watching, clicking, sharing, comments, all that stuff. It means a lot to me. I'm a sentimental guy sometimes. And the support the last week or so has really gotten to me. But let's talk about RJ Barrett because, it's a little bit polarizing. I have a lot of friends in New York, have a lot of friends who live in New York, who've lived in New York for a while, diehard Knicks fans. And I got to tell you, the sentiment around RJ Barrett was very negative, and for good reason. He stagnated a lot as a prospect. We can certainly look at who he's been. If you want to look at this is DeMar DeRozan, right? So we talk about, players who had a negative start. You can see DeMar DeRozan 2.8, 2.5, negative 2.7 box plus minus in his first 3 years. He returned negative value on investment, and he has turned into a hell of a player, with some people arguing that he could be potentially a Hall of Famer. This is RJ next to DeMar through their first 3 seasons. Sorry, through their first four seasons, 4 complete seasons. It's not that far apart. You can argue that DeMar was the better player, sure, but DeMar was also a little bit older. He didn't have the pandemic to disrupt his season. And I think that if you want to make a case that RJ was being over leveraged or misused, miscast, whatever you want to say, I think there's a case to be made that RJ Barrett could potentially have a turnaround not too dissimilar from someone like DeMar DeRozan. They have a fantastic lot in common. And I would argue that to this point, RJ has already had some much better seasons than DeMar shooting from three. I do want to mention that graph that I was talking about, which I couldn't find right before this live, I thought I could find it. It is a scatter plot of all these players, and Jokic is at the very, very high end of it. And, you got Steph Curry. And of course, these guys are beacons of efficiency. They take a lot of great shots. They make a lot of great shots, take a lot of threes. And typically, I think Nikola Jokic is like 5 to 6% true shooting on his career, better than Shaquille O'Neal. So if you want any idea of how efficient a scorer. So it was basically ranking out x-axis, y-axis, and y-axis was effectively x-axis was how many field goal attempts relative to the points you generate, and this is effectively what is considered efficient offense. If you can generate 20 points on 10 shots, you are basically God mode when it comes to the NBA. But if you need 18 shots to generate 20 points, maybe you're not as efficient as a guy who needs 16 to generate the same amount of points. Basketball is pretty simple when it comes to that side of it, when it comes to efficiency. And let's be honest, RJ takes a lot of inefficient shots. And historically, for an athlete of his, let's say, athletic dimensions, skill level, and profile, as a former number one overall pick, a former number one rated player out of high school, Gatorade National Player of the Year, all the accolades. And if you want a deeper insight into the type of player he was, definitely go check out the RJ and Scotty had a beefy history video that we did that went super viral, I think 3-4 months ago, in which we talked about just who RJ was. And I think a lot of people forget that because of how it ended up. But I won't say this. He has definitely been a productive NBA player. He just happens to have some glaring issues. So let's talk about those issues, because a lot of people would argue that he seems to be on a tear this summer for Team Canada. FIBA is different. I think the FIBA game favors RJ Barrett more. So for the same reason that it favored Carmelo Anthony more, because when you are a defensive liability, right, as RJ has often been on the perimeter, it helps to play in FIBA. Why do I say this? So, first of all, 19 comments. I've not been keeping up with the comments here. Hi, Gregory saying, hey, Rob. Hey, how are you doing? Koopa Troopa saying, Arenas trying to capture the bigot audience with his podcast. Oh, we can definitely talk about Gilbert Arenas towards the end of this, because what he said about South Sudan is downright the stupidest shit I've ever heard in my life. So we can definitely talk about that, because, I've been watching Lou all day since I was 15 years old. Blair Academy was in New Jersey. Obviously, I grew up a little bit around New York, New Jersey. I knew Lou Aldang, Charlie Villanueva, etc. Coming up. These guys were a little bit older than me, so I always like to watch good players who were older than me. And Lou Aldang, I think even back then, you could see just the nicest person. And what he's done with that South Sudan program is incredible. So I don't want to get too off topic talking about Lou Aldang and South Sudan and Gilbert Arenas, and in keeping with what I talked about in the last live, which is, trying to keep things positive and not giving negative shit too much attention. I don't want to give it too much attention, because then everyone's going to go click on what Gilbert Arenas said, but I do want to talk about the larger issue. Anyways, specifically to the point of RJ Barrett, I think that he can be a much better player. It's just there have been some glaring deficiencies. And in the FIBA game, the shrunken court. So there's a few things in FIBA that, to those of you who don't watch a lot of FIBA or you don't watch a lot of EuroLeague, you might miss it. Number one, the court is just a little bit smaller. Okay. Now, this is going to hurt a player like a Scotty Barnes, who's going to thrive in more space, right? But it's going to help. The extra spacing is going to help someone like limited spacing is going to help someone like RJ Barrett, who's much more comfortable playing in a phone booth than someone like Scotty Barnes. You saw Scotty Barnes struggle a lot at Florida State. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. When you scale up a level, I think Grady Dick would be a fantastic, fantastic FIBA player. It's yet to be seen if he will become a fantastic NBA player, but the shrunken court helps certain players, hurts certain players. If you're a bit of a perimeter defensive liability, take for instance a Sasha Vezenkov, you are definitely going to benefit from the FIBA game because there's no defensive 3-second in the key. The goaltending rules are a little bit adjusted. And as such, your bigs can offer a lot more protection to you as the liability on the perimeter, which also helps you to pick up a little bit higher because that big is always there. Consider an advantage something like Team France is going to have with Rudy Gobert and Victor Wembanyama, potentially both, just camping out in the paint. Well, now if you're a perimeter defender like Yvonne Fournier or, Nicholas Batum or whoever is going to be guarding up on the perimeter for the, Bilal Koulibaly, right? It kind of helps that they have some long defenders as it is. I mean, France could be suffocating, but that suffocation gets even extra. So, for a team like Team Canada in the future, a player like Zach Edey is going to be the game changer of game changers, especially if Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, RJ Barrett, guys like Jamal Murray, Shaden Sharp, if these guys, Andrew Nembhard, if these guys can continue to develop, well, you have plenty of pressure on the ball. And now you have the big guy, in the middle that will help. It will be a massive upgrade over a non-shot blocker like a Kelly Olynyk. Now, the Raptors, unfortunately, a lot of their RJ time was not coinciding with having Jakob Poeltl on the court. And I believe that if you put Jakob Poeltl or Christian Koloko or, somewhere down the line an Uri Shamshay, immediately an RJ Barrett is going to be a lot more effective because his pressure is going to be he's going to have a lot more protection on those drives. And in the end, it doesn't matter if you get blown by. All that matters is the guy that blows by you doesn't score. That's all it is, right? Some teams surrender controlled blowbys. If you go back and you listen, this I just want to talk about this, like this idea that all of basketball or especially all of the NBA is all about keeping your guy from scoring. That's impossibly stupid. You can never keep a guy from scoring. NBA players are supposed to score. What your goal is in the NBA, so this is why I think point of attack defense sometimes gets a little overblown, is within the scheme, you must force people away from places that they want to go on the court and delay how they get there and when they get there. There's a lot of players that are less gifted than RJ Barrett that have managed to turn themselves into phenomenal defenders. Case in point, Fred VanVleet. So I'm sorry, I'm refusing to buy into this notion that RJ Barrett cannot be a good defender. He played starter for a pretty good defensive team, which was the New York Knicks for some years. He did have a hand in turning around that culture, even if their fan base will never give him credit for it. So there's a lot. Yesterday on Ox's Graveyard Shift, we were having a talk about reparations, black culture in the United States, the pain of, slavery and everything that comes with it, right? And there were 6 people, 7 people, 8 people, and a lot of people were disagreeing. And what I didn't realize was because we were so honed in on our disagreements about certain subjects, we didn't realize that we agreed on 98% of everything because we were focused on our disagreements. I'll give you an example, and this is something from the Tony Robbins coaching book or whatever, right? So bear with me as an experiment here. Don't close your eyes yet. My bad. I messed that up. Look around the room for everything that's red. Everything that's red. I see 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things. So everything that's red, everything that's red, everything that's red. Just look around your room, right? Everything that's red. If you're, on if you're in your car listening to this, please don't follow along with what I'm saying. But if you are in a place able to do so, just look around for everything that's red, right? Now close your eyes. Now tell me everything that was blue. It's hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to do that because you weren't looking for what was blue, right? And I think too often with certain players,
right? Russell Westbrook comes to mind, right? We get very, very obsessed with what they don't do well because we sort of subconsciously start to hone in on their deficiencies because they were so hyped. RJ Barrett is not Kobe Bryant, right? RJ Barrett is not the Maple Mamba. A lot of that hype was due to the fact that he was extremely advanced for his age. His father is a professional basketball player who drilled great coaching and great habits into him at a very young age. He was extremely advanced at the youth level, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. He was ahead of the curve. But suddenly you get to 19 and suddenly people start to catch up a little bit. He was still a hella productive college player. He just wasn't as efficient as people expected him to be. I think most people when they saw RJ at Montverde would have expected him to go to Duke and be 60% true shooting, no questions. He was just such an athlete. But 53% with 66% free throw shooting, people start to look at you sideways a little bit. RJ Barrett was ahead of the curve until he wasn't. And then when he got up to the NBA, that advantage went away even more and more. And then suddenly he got this tag as a bust. But what is he a bust compared to? What is he a bust compared to? Is he a bust compared to Kobe Bryant? Yes. But is he a bust compared to the average number 3 overall pick? Barely. Not really. You could argue that he hasn't really produced like a top 3 pick and you would be right. You would win that award so far. But that doesn't mean that a 23 or 24-year-old doesn't have a lot of room to grow. And what I saw last year from RJ Barrett was a phenomenal amount of growth in several key areas. So we can't talk too much about the defense because he played in very suboptimal lineups. I think the Raptors overemphasized point of attack, man to man defense, and they were going away from schemes that would have helped a player like RJ. I also think that it's really hard for an RJ Barrett. If you're going to judge an RJ Barrett, let's judge him when he's not playing with G Leaguers and in this rotating door lineup of, okay, DJ Carton's in now. Now Malik Williams is starting. Like, I know that that's not indicative of his entire stint in Toronto, but let's be real. He was a positive as everything around him was burning down. No Emmanuel Quickly for large parts, no Scotty Barnes for the last 20 plus games. And he carried. He did a really good job. What I'm going to tell you that I was really impressed by with him was his shooting, specifically his shooting, his ability to drive the ball, his ability to play in transition, and most specifically, and there were a couple games where I think I even talked about it, where I think, the live cover was Star J, his playmaking. His playmaking is what separates him and a player like Jacoby Walter. So even if you say Walter has a much better jump shot, this guy has a better jump shot, that guy has a better jump shot. Yeah, they have better jump shooting potential, but it's not like his jump shot is broken. It's not like he's not hitting it. And in the end, it just matters that you can hit it at a decent enough clip to keep the defense respectable, right? And if they're going to back off, you're going to shoot. And I think that his in between game, his ability to drive and transition, his ability to get to the line. And you want to talk about efficiency, the most efficient shot in a basketball on the basketball court is what? It's a free throw. It's the most efficient shot. You are never going to beat a free throw unless you are a terrible free throw shooter, the most efficient thing. And when you tack on the fact that he invites contact, which I love about him, the fact that he is able to gap into the defense and put constant pressure, when you add to all that, you add the playmaking. I mean, when we were talking about him versus DeMar, take a look at this. You know what's sticking out to me in these numbers? Okay, yeah, they're relatively around the same in terms of efficiency, right? I mean, neither one is going balls out from defense, but he is a considerably higher volume 3-point shooter. How much higher volume? Forget about the era and all that stuff, right? He's shooting. Hold on, let me just make this a little bit bigger. I'm going blind. Okay, he's shooting 34.6% from three. That is barely, barely under league average. League average has been about 36 and a half. So he's 2 percentage points under league average on 5 attempts per game. DeMar DeRozan was at 26.7% at this point in his career, despite being a year older. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, he's not working. He's a really good rebounder. Again, that's an advantage that he has over DeMar. If you look at the advanced, he's a better playmaker at this age. He's played on better teams and he's a better playmaker. It's a 14% assist percentage. And I saw this number go way up for the Raptors last year. And of course, you have to factor in the situation does matter, right? If you're in a bad situation for your development, like I'm not saying New York is like some terrible place to be developed, but it's not exactly Memphis. It's not exactly Toronto under Darko and under, previous regimes like under Dwayne Casey. It's not like I'm like, oh wow, you failed there. You're just a bust, right? I think Miami, Toronto, OKC, Memphis, these are the teams. San Antonio sometimes, but I'm wishy-washy on them a little bit. These are places where if you fail here, now I'm looking at you sideways. RJ hasn't failed at one of those places. In fact, you could make an argument, if you're willing to, that he had the worst possible situation imaginable last year with no rim protector behind him other than Kelly Olynyk and Jonte Porter, which is not anyone's idea of shot blocking or rim protection or rim deterrence, even. And you've got guys just going straight. Now, the other thing that rim protection does is not just about shot blocking, it is about the actual rim deterrence. If you have a Christian Koloko or a Jakob Pertl or a Victor Wembanyama, not comparing those three, but you get my point. When you have that big dude back there, the player that you are guarding becomes way easier to guard because there's less of a chance that they're going to drive towards the basket. So they're trying to get their shot off in a certain range. If Where's the hardest place to guard a player? Full court. It's the hardest place. Why? They have the most real estate. Full court with no one behind you is the hardest situation in basketball to navigate. And those who can navigate it are freak athletes. RJ Barrett was on an island very often. There wasn't a lot of help defense around him. He was playing with a lot of bad defenders and non-defenders, a lot of dysfunctional, defensive sets. So I think that overall, if his defense can get better by 15 to 20%, I'm not asking for a miracle. I'm not asking him to become prime Michael Jordan or Scottie Pippen. I'm saying 15 to 20% better on defense, which is perfectly capable. And by the way, he's alluded to the fact that he wants to do this, which is a really encouraging sign. People say a lot of shit. I believe him when he says he wants to be a better defender. He works hard on defense. He's very ineffective defensively, but it doesn't mean that it's from a lack of trying. He's not just like mailing it in defensively. He's not just like one of those lazy ass defenders that drive you crazy, like a Anthony Simons or to some extent Damian Lillard. He's not like that. And at worst case, he's a 6'6", really strong dude who can at the very least serve as some sort of lower end, hidden type of role on defense. Yeah, you're going to get schemed out in the playoffs if he doesn't get better. You're going to get toast in the playoffs. But is he that bad of a defender? Is he a worse defender than a Luka Doncic? Is he a worse defender than some of those guys? Not really. And what I'm going to say is that the offensive upside that he could provide is, while not on the Luka and Shea and all those guys level, I think he could be potentially DeMar DeRozan for the Raptors. Maybe a slightly poor man's DeMar DeRozan. There's some work to be done here, but he has a lot in common with him. Look at his free throw rate. So let's take a look at free throw attempts per 100 possessions. Where are we at here? Where are we at? So free throw attempts, it's damn near close. I mean, we all know, we watched DeMar DeRozan. 7.3 versus 8.2 is not a large gap, right? Usage 25.6 versus 24%. So it's been on similar usage, right? And you could argue again that he's been a lesser player for all factors and benefits. Yes, he has been a slightly worse player than DeMar DeRozan to this point in their careers. He's shooting a slightly higher true shooting percentage at 52.8 versus 52.6. It's not, I'm not comparing incomparable players. He's just had a bigger role than DeMar. And he's been on better teams. He's played against some tougher competition in bigger games. And also, might I say, and this is a seldom brought up fact about RJ Barrett, he was crazy good in the playoffs. He was considerably better than Emmanuel Quickly in the playoffs. So he showed up. So when the game went into half court, right? So ironically, he's been thriving in full court situations with the Raptors. But when the game slowed down for him, he got even better. That was very encouraging. It's not the hugest sample size. His second year was probably his best year in New York, and then there was stagnation, and then there was the fans turning on him, and then there was fans demanding that he give back money because he's overpaid and etc. But I don't really think of the modern NBA, his current contract is all that crazy. Honestly, you could slice maybe $2-3 million off of it, but it's really not that bad, in my opinion. Okay, so let's get some comments here. John Hamilton saying RJ reminds me of DeMar, great offensive player. Sure. James saying he should play the 2 and we should try to get a 3 and D via the draft. I'm not really sure you want him playing the 2 or the 3, but I can see where you're coming with that. I think the issue gets exacerbated when you put him at 3 because now you become a little bit smaller. Terrence Davis saying, crazy to say RJ barely a bus, though I see him being our lead scorer and can be on a championship team. He still would take second or third in pecking order, but his game is scoring. His in-game scoring is good enough. So scoring, to me, scoring and playmaking are always thought in tandem. And the reason I've been a little reluctant sometimes to talk about RJ Barrett is because I feel people get a little bit carried away with some of his offensive explosions. Now, naturally, this is a guy who can go out and score 35, 40 points, no problem, right? And I think the question you have to ask is, where are those points coming from, right? Because modern NBA offenses are designed to be more efficient than what we were talking about, 20 years ago. 20 years ago, 1.03 was good offense. Today, 1.03 is not a good shot. It's not a good mid-range shot. That's a terrible mid-range shot. So the mid-range assassins are regularly getting more than 1.03 points or around there or more. So it's kind of like today, the average bad shot is netting more points than the average offense 20 years ago. And that's because of the three. And so RJ Barrett's two things that he's going to have to do are dial it up 20% defensively and dial up his 3-point attempt rate without hurting his percentages. And I think at that point, he becomes what I consider a sub all-star. So there's, in my estimation, I know that there's about 25 to 20, 24 to 26 all-stars every single year. I think there are about 45 all-stars, 40 to 45 all-stars every year in the NBA. They don't get in for various reasons. They're on a bad team, bad context, they get injured. There's a lot of reasons, right? They get snubbed, right? So last year, you could make an argument for guys like Pascal Siakam, James Harden. There's a lot of guys. So he would be in the next 45 right below that, which is like sub all-stars, which includes guys like OG Anunoby, frankly, respectfully. It includes guys like OG Anunoby. It includes guys like potentially, who else would be a sub all-star? Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo, kind of in that range, right? So that's not a superstar. Maybe that's not a leading scorer, right? But Jasper versus the world saying, do you think RJ needs to add to the mid-range shot to his game to take the next leap? I don't necessarily think that's it's not like he doesn't have a mid-range shot, right? I mean, I don't remember his mid-range percentages off my head, but I like him going to the rim, right? You could argue that if he has a smaller defender, that he should have the wherewithal to be able to back that defender down and take a midi over him. And certainly, if he's going to be in the DeMar DeRozan conversations, he might need to play a little close to the basket. Becomes a little bit harder, of course, when you consider Jakob Poeltl in there. So it does help from a portability standpoint. It helps that he focused more on being a 3-point shooter. Quantum Bass taking charge prevent dying too early says Darko thinks he can be like Manu Ginobili. Well, Manu is one of my favorite players of all time. I don't see that upside. James saying he's a better scorer than Scotty right now. Pure scoring, getting to the line, smoothness. Last year, yeah. Yeah, sure. You can make that argument. He's also, I think, a year and a half to 2 years. He's a year and a bit older than Scotty. So again, it's not like it's weird because he's been in the league 5 years, right? And like he's going on year 5. And so it feels like he's been in the league way longer. If I ask the average person when was RJ Barrett drafted, most of them say 2018 or 2019. He's just been such a known commodity that it feels like even before he went to the NBA, he was already known, if you know what I mean, right? Like I'm pretty sure a lot of people heard of Jacoby Walter this year. I'm pretty sure most of you heard of Uri Shamshay like last month. With RJ Barrett, added to the fact that he's Canadian, we've known about this kid since he was 14 years old, which means we've known about him for over a decade, which means we've been building up who he would be in our minds for over a decade. You know what I mean? And he hasn't become an all-star or superstar. So it's very easy to trick yourself into thinking he's way older than he actually is. That being said, it's also worth noting if we're going to give Pascal Siakam the leeway of starting basketball late, then you must also tack on the fact that RJ Barrett started basketball early. He's been playing basketball for a very long time. So I can understand also people saying he has limited upside, but I also think that we saw a tremendous growth last year from him. This also occurred to me. So quantum boss taking saying RJ has Mamba mentality after losing his brother. You know, human motivation is the strangest thing. You know, some people take loss in different ways. I know certain people who would completely lose their mind and lose themselves after going through something like RJ did with Nathan, right? Some people, it completely reinvigorates them. It clarifies them. It can give you, you know, first of all, I speak on this not as someone who's lost a brother, but someone who's lost parents, is that I expected to lose my parents in my lifetime. I didn't expect to lose them when I was 20 and 13, respectively, but most people do. But I also watched my grandparents lose their kids. And I watched my uncles lose their younger brother, or I watched my aunts lose their younger sister. And even if I could disagree with how they handled me sometimes, even at the age of 20, I knew that as much pain as I was feeling, it was pain that I expected to feel in my life. I don't think RJ Barrett or any older brother expects to have to bury their younger brother, especially not when they're 23 years old. RJ was 23 when he lost his brother, who was younger than him. That's earth shattering shit. So I was worried. I felt he can go one of two ways. But something like this type of tragedy, can completely isolate you. It can make you different. It can make you very different. It can completely shift your mind, your focus. It can make you not care about basketball, or it can make you over care about basketball. He's chosen to go the second way, which is, you know, from what I understand, just from talking to people who've been closer to him, he has taken it as a mission to really do something in honor of his brother. And, you know, RJ coming out and becoming an all-star next year, while seeming very improbable right now, is certainly not impossible. And that is partially because, again, he does some very amazing things very, very well. He was at nearly 60% true shooting last year. Like, that is hella efficient. It took DeMar years to get to that level. So this is just something we're seeing from RJ. I think there's a case to be made that he could be a two box plus minus guy next year. Now, if that happens, the conversation around this guy is going to change completely. Number one, if he's a two box plus minus, the Raptors are going to be a playoff team. Like, that is 100, unless everything else around him fails. Like, he is right now being baked in as a net neutral player. If he turns into one of the 50 to 60 best players in the NBA next year, I mean, that completely changes the equation, because right now you're pegging him as your third best player. And especially if he remains your third best player and he does all that, my God, you're stacked. You're stacked. You might be one of the better teams in the East. He holds a lot of power because of his usage, because of how many minutes he plays, because of how many touches he commands. Him getting more efficient as a playmaker, him correcting some of his shot quality issues could be a massive game changer. And him becoming a better defender changes your entire equation defensively, because he is your weak link right now defensively. He's your worst defender. And unlike Gary Trent Jr., where it was really just very physically limiting, he didn't have the wingspan that RJ did. He didn't necessarily even have the size that RJ did. I think RJ Barrett, you know, could be a much better defender if he applies himself to it and he fixes some of his technique and stuff. He didn't have necessarily the greatest lateral movement and quickness, and so I think sometimes that is lacking. But I think this is a lot scheme related and even reps related, and you know, he's big enough and strong enough to be able to hold his own on defense, I think. So let's get to a couple more. Jacob Isaac saying Darko's system is made for him. So I didn't think that initially when we traded for him, but I'm starting to think that more now. Nathan Taylor saying RJ is a year and 18 days older than Scotty. Yeah. Peter Imhoff Former NY fan, he was the third ball dominant player on the floor for the Knicks. The fit was awful, and Tibbs' offense is pretty primitive in terms of moving the ball. Totally miscast in New York. I 100% agree with you. I have always found, you know, Tom Thibodeau to be a very difficult coach to glean in terms of who is what in his system, because his system doesn't necessarily cater to anyone offensively. It really just caters to team success and defense. And so, did we all see this Jimmy Butler in New York under him? Not really. Did we get the best of Joakim Noah and Derrick Rose and all those guys? I have no idea. Right. So, yeah, I think you're right. And he looked better. He looked better under Darko. And look, last year we talked about it to death. Darko has made people better playmakers and better finishers around the rim. He helped every player do that. Every player who played for him got better at that. So, anyways, let's talk about two more things and then we'll get to any super chats if there are any. This isn't going to be a super, super long live. I like those lives that are under an hour. So let's talk about the lineups. So I have three possible lineups, and then there's a fourth that I don't want to talk about because I just don't want to even speak it into existence, which involves Bruce Brown starting, and I'll tell you what the advantages and disadvantages are to each. I will tell you that all of these lineups factor in Christian Koloko coming back, and if Christian Koloko is not back, then just factor in that 15th, 16th, 15th roster spot that's open right now will be filled by a backup center, because I don't think there's any way in hell you're rolling into the season expecting Brandon Carlson or Ulrich Shamshay to play those minutes. You can make a case that if they really want to lose, they can continue playing Kelly Olynyk at the 5, but I think he's miscast there. I think he's much more of a 4. And I know that those terms are pretty interchangeable, but Kelly Olynyk is actually a pretty good defender, and he didn't look like one last year for the Raptors because they completely botched how they used him. You could say it's by design because it's the same team that started Malik Williams. So I'm not considering that the Raptors were trying to win last year, but I am saying that I've watched Kelly Olynyk be a fantastic defender, or at least a very above average defender, for a very long time. And he has some very good skills if he's playing with a typical vertical big. Okay, so lineup 1 involves the aforementioned Kelly Olynyk starting with Jakob Poeltl, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, and Emmanuel Quickley. The upside of this lineup is that it's big. It's a really big lineup. And I like the idea of playing big with this team, partially because there aren't a lot of teams that are going to be able to match up with the size that you have between Barnes, Olynyk, and Poeltl up front. You're going to be like a lesser version of what the Orlando Magic do to you, which is they just overwhelm you with size. Off the bench, you would have Scotty or Davion Mitchell running that point guard unit. Then you have Jacoby Walter, Grady Dick, Bruce Brown, potentially Christian Koloko, or insert shot blocker. Why do this way? Well, I think there's a part of me that thinks maybe this takes away some of the balance that you could achieve with your second unit and first unit. But I think that this is one of the best ways that you're going to hide RJ Barrett defensively and give that first unit at least a shot. There's also plenty of spacing on that first unit. If you imagine Kelly and RJ sort of spread out to the corners, right? If you imagine Jakob Poeltl being used as a screener, Emmanuel Quickley and Scotty Barnes occasionally taking turns initiating, with Jakob screening or Scotty screening for IQ or Jakob screening for Scotty. It's like there's a lot of different ways that you can go about this. The bench unit would be really cool because you're putting cutters, spacers, screeners, and shooters around Scotty in the bench unit. Gone is the Jalen McDaniels of the world and the Gary Trents. This is not one-dimensional players. And it's yet to be seen if Jacoby Walter is going to flash some level of playmaking upside or anything like that. But I could make a case that that second unit will be far more effective than whatever the hell the Raptors were running last year. So that's my first lineup. My second lineup switches a few things, which is it makes you a little bit smaller, where you sub in Grady Dick into the starting lineup. This, I will caution, is probably the way the Raptors will go, but I don't want them to go this way. I want them to go with my third lineup. But the lineup they're going to likely go with, and this is the one that is just, it drives me crazy that players need to start. You know what I mean? Oh, this guy's a future. He needs to start. I disagree. The Heat don't do that. The Heat kept guys like Dion Waiters and Tyler Hero on the bench, even though they really believed in their upside, it didn't really matter to them, right? Manu Ginobili coming off the bench for San Antonio. I don't really care about that. I just care about how you fit with that starting lineup. And if Steven Jackson's fit is better with the starting lineup than Manu Ginobili, and your bench unit works better with Manu Ginobili, then sacrifice for the team, right? But in this situation, you would put your five most primary or primaryized, that's not a word, your prioritized assets on the court in the starting lineup, and then you would put guys who are not those five guys on the bench. Do I agree with this? No, because I think between Grady Dick and RJ Barrett, you lose way too much defensively. And I think you put way too much pressure on Scotty and Jakob Pertl. I also think that playing at the four is going to be detrimental to Scotty to some extent. Like last year, we saw Jakob, Pascal, Scotty. And that was the most effective part of Scotty's season, where Scotty was playing the two, OG was playing the three, right? So even if you take OG out of the equation, because you don't even have the ability to play as big as you did last year. Last year, our starting lineup was Dennis Schroeder, Scotty Barnes, right? 1, 2. And then you had OG, Pascal, and Jakob. That is a huge team. And on that huge team, Scotty did really well. The minute we shifted Scotty Barnes down to the four, it was a completely different equation. He actually struggled a lot more. So you could argue it's the lack of talent, but I can tell you right now, 8 games into last season, he was at about 8.1 box plus minus. He was in crazy territory. He was in all-time record-breaking territory. He was in the 100, like 8 games into last season. He was 117th all-time, okay, all-time seasons in the NBA in terms of box plus minus. I think he was just nuts. So I don't like this lineup for the particular fact of two things. Number one, the defense gets way worse, puts way too much pressure on Scotty and Jakob Pertl. And number two, it makes you small. And I don't like that. This is the lineup that I actually want. And it's a little bit of a compromise. So you do get a little bit smaller because, yeah, okay, Jacoby Walter 6'5", Emmanuel Quickly 6'2", but they have really long arms. Okay, I think that matters. Like Jacoby Walter has a 6'10" wingspan. RJ Barrett's around 6'10" himself. Emmanuel Quickly is about 6'3", 6'2" with a 6'8" wingspan. Scotty Barnes is about 6'8", 6'9" with a 7'4" wingspan. Jakob Pertl, I think, has a 7'3" or 7'4" wingspan himself. This is a very long team, and I like that. Okay, and unlike the Grady Dick variant of this, which was pretty long as well, I think on this one, you get a little bit less playmaking in the starting lineup with Walter, but you get it off your bench. The reason that I like this lineup a little bit more than the previous lineup is because I think that Barnes, Dick, Brown, Olynyk, and Koloko is a brilliant lineup. I think also if you end up playing Davion Mitchell with that second unit, that gives Grady his on-ball reps as a creator. So Davion Mitchell and Grady Dick, Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown, they're all playmakers, but it can allow Grady to occasionally siphon off some of those creation opportunities, and that can be good for development too. So that is how I see those lineups breaking out. Let me know in the comments if you're watching this afterwards, which of those three lineups. Just pick lineup 1, 2, and 3, and then we can talk about which one is the best. Now, I want to talk about, also late development stories. Some people forget this is Steph Curry's career. Go look at years 1, 2, and 3 for Steph Curry. I mean, I'm not saying he was bad. He was great, right? But in that third season, and this is before box plus minus and EPM and all that stuff became very, very known. He played 26 games in his third season, but his career absolutely blossomed in year 4. And I remember Warriors fans in 2012 and 2013 thinking, is this real? Is this not real? And then by the time, but I promise you, as someone who was there, and remind yourself too, don't be a revisionist historian. Could you have seen in 2012 what was coming in 2015, 2016? Did you see Steph Curry becoming one of the top 10 players of all time? Because I don't think anyone saw that. So I'm saying that as situations change, and so much of Steph's success came down to system, new coach, new system, new teammates, how his synergy with Draymond Green unlocked him. And so, yeah, like when you're talking about high lottery talents who work hard, yeah, sometimes it's really just they're brimming at the surface and they just need a healthy season like Steph had, or maybe they just need slightly more optimized teammates, right? Or a better system. And I think RJ is playing in a system that is designed to help him, right? So, okay, now this is gonna, if you came in here trying to boost up RJ, I want to be cautious when I say this. The following is my listing of the top 12 players on this team in terms of absolute upside. What is absolute upside? Absolute upside means everything hits right, which means this player hits their 100th percentile, the best they can be. Everything clicks. Oh, their shooting is a weakness. It becomes a strength because it's projectable as a strength. I'm talking about archetypes here. So if you're going to see someone that you're expecting very high, a little bit lower, it's partially because they're a little bit older. And I just think that a lot of their development runway has already passed. That doesn't mean that the fifth or sixth guy on this list is going to be worse than the second guy or the third guy on this list. It just means that if the second guy works as hard as the fifth guy, and if he has enough luck as the fifth guy, if they all have the same rise relative to what their expected upside, I don't say expected upside, their absolute upside. So there are players like an Alex Sarr. What's Alex Sarr's absolute upside? It's enormous. Of course, it's enormous. He's a 6'11" gazelle-like player who has incredible fluidity, right? The absolute upside is amazing, right? The likelihood of that outcome being achieved is very low, and therein lies the intangibles. You talk about the mentality of the player, how hard they work, their injury history, all that stuff, their age, right? If Alex Sarr was 16 and he was this good, we might be having a different conversation. But he's 19 and he had a really bad summer league, so we're having that different conversation. So try not to get too upset at where these players are on this list. But this is I'll talk you through why I feel this way. So this is my absolute upside list on the Raptors. So this is Scotty Barnes at number 1. No, I'm assuming most people don't need an explanation to that. Uri Shamshay at number 2. I think a lot of people are going to need an explanation to that. And if you really need one, go watch the last video because I am exceptionally high on this guy. Number 3 is Grady Dick. Number 4 is Emmanuel Quickly. Number 5 is RJ Barrett. Number 6 is Jacoby Walter. Number 7 is Christian Coloco. Number 8 is Jonathan Mobo. I struggle between those two, but I put them in similar areas. Number 9 is Jamal Shed. Number 10 is Ochai Abaji. Number 11 is Brandon Carlson. And number 12 is Davion Mitchell. Okay, let's talk about this. So why Barnes at number 1? Do we need an explanation? He is the absolute explanation. Like, he is the definition of what you try to get when you're drafting at the top of the draft. Every top team, like when you talk about like every team at the top of the draft dreams that they will get a jumbo creator playmaker who has defensive instincts and upside. Scotty Barnes, if it goes right, is one of the 20 greatest players of all time. Like, that's if it goes perfectly. If it doesn't go perfectly, maybe he's a 6-time All-Star, 5-time All-Star, and I think we can explore that. But at 22 years old, he became an All-Star for the first time, and I think that that is not something to sleep on, right? He was 22 and a half years old when he became an All-Star. There aren't a lot of players in NBA history who've had that happen. Number 2, Uri Shamshay. I mean, again, the likelihood of him achieving his upside is limited, right? He's very raw. He's got all these holes right now. His jump shot, it looks like sometimes he's a push shot. That has a long way to go. He's extremely, naive. There's still the possibility of homesickness, culture shock. There's still the possibility, of a growth spurt, which doesn't go so well, or maybe does go so well. I mean, there's so many things, right? So it's a pure hypothetical at this point, right? With Uri Shamshay, you look at it like a Giannis Antetokounmpo or something like that. It's like you compare a Giannis as a rookie to a Kawhi Leonard. Of course, one of them was way further than the other one, right? But you take his athletic potential on the basketball court, you take his acumen, his hard work, and already his brimming skill potential, and you see why I put him up there as number 2. Because while it's easy to try to pigeonhole him into a Serge Ibaka. I've heard a lot of people compare him to Serge Ibaka. I've heard some people compare him to Clint Capella. I myself have fallen into the temptation. I think he has much less in common with those guys and much more in common with really big playmakers. And so, again, I'm not comparing him to Scotty Barnes. He's way, way worse than Scotty at the same age. But he does a lot of the same stuff on the basketball court that you would ask a Scotty Barnes to do, which is to say that he is a jumbo-sized playmaker. And I really buy his playmaking potential and his athletic potential and his ability to switch like 3-4 positions defensively puts him in a completely different category as guys like Serge Ibaka, who were, while great defenders, not really able to switch 4 positions like this, right? So young Surge, I remember watching young Surge a lot in OKC. I was a really big fan of his coming into the draft. I did not see this level of absolute upside from Surge, and I was higher on Surge than pretty much anyone I knew at the time. So I think his upside is so high because he has immense two-way potential and he has incredible positional versatility and he's a really hard worker. Number 3 is Grady Dick. Again, the gap between Grady and Emmanuel Quickly is really 4 years in age, and also Grady is 5 inches, 6 inches taller. I'm always going to give the big playmaker the upside over the smaller playmaker, and that's just how my mind works. Maybe you disagree. But Grady Dick's shooting potential is absolutely off the charts. His defensive potential remains a mystery to me, but I think that he can be a net neutral defensively. Not a great player defensively, but I think he can hold water defensively. I think he can be a really good rebounder, really disruptive. He just had a really tough summer league. So it's really hard to put him above Emmanuel Quickly or RJ Barrett right now. But I'm going to continue to buy the shooting potential with him. I'm going to continue to buy the movement. I'm going to continue to buy the work ethic and who he's been. And frankly, there's 2 Gatorade All-American Gatorade National Player of the Years on this list, and he's one of them. So I think he's just fantastic. Number 4, Emmanuel Quickly, right? So again, Dick Quickly Barrett is a conversation that I can get into. Shamshay is not a conversation I can get into. He is firmly, in my opinion, above those guys. In fact, if you want to know a player that I really compare Uber Shamshay to, if you want like a real comparison that I believe, it's actually a player that I was really high on last year, especially during the playoffs, and that was Derek Lively. Like I couldn't say enough nice things about Derek Lively because every day I would watch him do something crazy. Uber Shamshay projects much more like a Derek Lively to me than a Serge Ibaka, which is to say he has the rim protection. He's just way rawer than Derek Lively right now. That's it. So Emmanuel Quickly, the deep shooting potential is really important for me. You know, the ability to vertically stretch out the court to about to 35 feet provides so much more space for your teammates, not only production for yourself offensively. He's expanding himself as a playmaker. He's obviously a very phenomenal worker. I think on this entire list, the 2 prospects that I am surest about achieving their maximum upside are Scotty Barnes and Emmanuel Quickly, just because I just trust them to work. I trust them to be in the gym. I trust them to, be relatively, I don't want to say injury free, but relatively healthy. And they're just really, really good young players who have this knack for getting better. So I'm going to trust Emmanuel Quickly under Darko Rajakovic is going to unlock a lot of point guard skills that he didn't really get to show in New York. And he looked good last year. I think he can look even better. We're seeing a lot of defensive stuff from him. I think he has the potential to be a really good defender as well, like a really plus defender. I don't want to put Drew Holiday or Derek White on him, but a notch below that. I mean, he has a chance to be really good defensively too. Number 5, RJ Barrett. We've spent the entire video talking about RJ Barrett. I think he's fantastic. I think he's a really good athlete. Again, among this entire list, he's the 3rd prospect in terms of who I trust to achieve their upside. He's a worker. He's obviously very good, but he does have limitations. The lateral quickness, the size to some extent. He's not a jumbo creator. He is a reasonably sized guard wing prospect. I think the fact that he is 5 years into his NBA career as of this year, I think the fact that he's a little bit older, the fact that he picked up basketball a little bit earlier makes me think that he should be a little bit further ahead. Now, there's a lot of stuff that could have gone into that. It could have been the Tibbs system. It could have been the pandemic. And so I remain very hopeful that he can pass a lot of players on this list. If at the end of their careers you told me RJ Barrett was the 2nd best player in this entire list, I wouldn't think you were crazy. So again, the gap between him, Grady, IQ, you're really splitting hairs. But I'm giving the advantage to the youngest players when it comes to absolute upside because we just have way more that we haven't seen before from them. Number 6, Jacoby Walter. Jacoby Walter behind RJ Barrett is pretty crazy. And I think a lot of people would be very upset with me for that. And I hope you're not. But the largest part of Jacoby Walter's game that's missing right now is the playmaking potential. And so you could say he could become a very valuable archetype. So if RJ Barrett could become a slightly undersized jumbo creator, think Cade Cunningham, actually, like that type of player. Well, maybe Jacoby Walter could become a KCP with some stuff. And so I think you have to ask yourself what's really more valuable, an inefficient or a less efficient offensive engine that can't do it super, super well in the superstar level, or is it the 3-and-D wing prototype, right? So I think you could split hairs on that. I just really value playmaking, and I saw way more playmaking from RJ Barrett as a high school player than I saw from Jacoby Walter. I think he was a better college player than Jacoby Walter was. And it'd be very crazy for me to say that, like, given the gaps, right? Like, they're both very athletic, right? I think Jacoby might even be more athletic to some extent, right? Like, I don't know about that actually. But RJ's ability to get to the line, RJ's ability to get to the hoop, right? That's not necessarily something to just sleep on, right? And it's not like I'm talking about some geriatric. I'm not talking about him. He's not a 30-year-old, right? And yeah, so I think again, if from 1 to 6, you can shuffle the order. I think 1 is solid for me. If you told me at the end of their careers that Scotty was not the best player on this list, I'd be like, wow, someone became really great. But if you told me Jacoby Walter was the second best player on this list, RJ was the second best player on this list, Grady was the second best player on this list, IQ was the second best player on this list, Uri Shamshay was the second best player on this list, I believe you. I believe you on all those fronts. If any of those things happen, what I probably wouldn't believe you is that Koloko was the second best player on this list. Now, I was really high on Christian Koloko, and I remain very high on him, but it is worth noting that he has missed a very critical year of his development. And this is after missing years of his early development because of starting basketball late. This type of disruption can be very detrimental in terms of impacting the overall upside of a player. I still think he can be an all defensive type of guy. I just wonder where his offense will be. And I don't see anything more than a really good role player. Whereas all these other guys, I could see more than a role player. Jonathan Mobo, number 8, really high on him as a valuable role player. Again, I still see a role player in him, but one of the most valuable type of role players, which is to say he can plug into like 4 different lineups. He can be 3 different positions. He can guard 3, 4 different positions. If he can shoot, and again, he thinks he can, he talks about how he was able to do that in high school. He grew up playing guard. His evolution could be really amazing. And in this entire group of prospects, he's the one, in the second group that gives me the most like, let me wait and see. But he is 22 going on 23. And I do think that that's relevant when it comes to talking about a prospect who's this far away from being a ready-made contributor. I think the upside here is, if the Raptor season does go downhill, he is one player who's going to have a lot of opportunity because they brought him into play right away. And I think they're going to plug him in right away. And we're going to see. We're going to see, him struggle or thrive at the NBA level. And it's a big gap from where he was playing last year at San Francisco. Number 9, Jamal Shedd. I mean, again, prove me wrong, Jamal Shedd, man. Like, you may be the next Fred VanVleet or Kyle Lowry, but I don't really see that in him right now. I do think that he's a really pesky defender. I love his dog, and he's going to be a player. I think he's going to be a really good role player in the NBA. Projecting star or anything close to what Fred VanVleet became is such a rare outcome, right? And again, the best version of Jonathan Mobo or Christian Koloko is better than the best version of Jamal Shedd or Ochai Agbaji in the same way that the best version of Pascal Siakam is better than the best version of Fred VanVleet. The same way that the best version of Nikola Jokic is better than the best version of Jamal Murray, right? You give the advantage to size. I know that people are down on size in the NBA, but sometimes it does matter. Number 10, well, Ochai Agbaji, still clinging on the hopes of athletic upside, but really the final 3 on this list are the guys that I really don't know if they're going to be NBA players, and that's Ochai Agbaji, Brandon Carlson, and Davion Mitchell. Nothing against any of these guys. They've all shown flashes. Davion Mitchell. Well, I wish we had Donovan Mitchell. Davion Mitchell last year, towards the end of the season, was really good. Brandon Carlson had a lot of potential in summer league. As a 25-year-old, he vastly outperformed Uri Shamshay and a lot of other players on the team, and he looked good. He looked very fluid. I don't know if he's going to hold up at the NBA level, though. As a 25-year-old, it is much easier to dominate summer league than it is to dominate the NBA. If he is given NBA minutes, as occasional stretch big, I expect him to be pretty limited. I don't really see anything more than an end of the bench guy for any of these guys, frankly. Okay, and Ochai Agbaji, who had just a horrible summer league to the point where when people were talking about, in their podcast, when they were talking about the roundups of like the guys who most disappointed in summer league, people barely even talked about him because he was such a non-factor. that he barely even registered. I don't think people even knew that he was there. So I think that it's just really sad. Of course, I saw the clip of Ochai, and I think he was with the Raptors development thing, helping out all those kids, and the kids really seem to like him. And then so you see moments like that, and you're just like, well, if he's just a good kid and he's a good teammate, if he can just be a really tough practice player and put some pressure defensively on guys to make them better offensively in play groups and whatever, and if he can just be a non-disruptive force in the locker room, is that maybe the best you can get from Ochai Agbaji. Because if you're expecting some sort of Lou Dort type of evolution, or I heard some people say they were expecting an Aaron Nesmith type of player, my God, like don't hold your breath. At this point, I'm very disappointed so far in him. I realize that sometimes saying you're disappointed in a player or pointing out their flaws can sometimes lead a lot of people to become very um, angry at that player, or very loud and very vocal about their discontent with that player, something like what happened with RJ Barrett in New York. I would like to hopefully encourage you to deter away from that. He is, yes, an ex lottery pick, but someone picked him there. He didn't pick himself. I'm sure he works very, very hard. He's not someone that pisses me off like a Jalen McDaniels or a Dennis Schroeder. So you will not hear any vitriol or anything towards him that's going to be anything personal. I just don't think he's that great at basketball right now, and I wish that were not the case, because the Raptors could really use him. The Raptors could really use him, and I know that again, as a 14th pick, you're always in a lose-lose situation, because you obviously weren't a very highly regarded lottery prospect, but you just happened to go in the lottery, and so you wear the tag that was a lottery pick, but you also wear the tag of but barely, right? So if he was a 15th overall pick, do we care? I mean, the 16th overall pick in the next draft, which is AJ Griffin, just got traded for the 44th pick in this year's draft. Just to give you an idea of what 14 to 18, range picks do, right? And summer league is not everything. All right, maybe he'll play better with different players, but I didn't see a lot, towards the end of last season. So I really hope that Ochai Agbaji has a very productive next 3 months, and then he really gets his NBA career back on track. Okay, let's get to some comments. We got 66 comments. And I thought I was going to say something at the end that was very social. Yeah, I wanted to share an idea with y'all. And it was Spiro saying Neesmith's comparison is wild. Agreed. Maroon Prince saying, I'd be happy if Jacoby's mid-range outcome was a Norman Powell type. Whew, that would be fantastic. Garthy12, thank you for the comment, said, can Grady be a better shooter than Keegan Murray? Yes. Spiro saying, dare I say Giannis with a jump shot is a potential ceiling? I don't know about that. I don't. I see way less young. Like he's a really good athlete. Giannis was like something else as an athlete. He's a really good sprint athlete, but he's not as vertical an athlete. So I think Rob sees Mobo in the G League in the beginning. Well, I mean, I hope for his sake that he is getting some minutes. And unlike a lot of people, I don't really care if you play in the G League or in the NBA. Yeah. So I'm going to play this off my phone. I recorded it. I was going to download it so I could play it for y'all, but it's very offensive. So it's going to be a trigger warning to any person of African origin to please turn away and just come back in a minute. And I want to say a minute and 30 seconds from now. This is Paul Pierce and Gilbert Arenas discussing South Sudan's win over, almost win over the United States.
Man, they probably ain't got nobody. Yeah, I need to see what they look like, though. Man, they probably ain't got nobody over 6'3". Bro, they got basketball teams out there. They even got basketball courts out there anywhere. You stop. And now we got South Sudan. No, look, next game we gonna play Langston Galloway, Micah Powder. Micah. They gonna play Nigel Davis, and we still gonna win by 30. They can put me on the court versus South Sudan right now.
Who pissed? I'm really trying to hear it. How are you gonna talk about
the tallest guy on the court is going to be 6'3", as if the tallest person ever in the NBA was not from Sudan, as if one of the tallest people in the males almost lost to some Africans. Yeah, we almost lost to them. And the king had to save. The king had to save us. I know the LeBron haters are mad. We almost lost to the Ahi tribe. This is crazy. Man, Embiid over there, goddamn throwing the game. He throwing the game for his cousins and shit. We're supposed to be losing to air up there. Come on, man. Cool Runnings. We're not supposed to lose to the Cool Runnings team. They don't even have shoes. They get their shoes from America. I need to see what they look like, though.
Okay. Y'all can come back now. Lot of ignorance. Lot of stupidity. You know, I think there's something to be said in life about never allowing yourself to become the clown at the show. Not without your consent, at least. Can you imagine what would have happened if a white person had said that about South Sudan? Do you know how quickly they would be canceled? Do you know how much more infuriating it would be? But who chose to put these people on network television? Who chose to give them who chose to give them their podcast deals? Right? Be real. Are these people talking about people who are like them? No, they are not. They are not talking about South Sudan like those are our people or anything like that. They are talking about South Sudan in such a disrespectful way. Look, man, I'm gonna tell you something as someone who's been to Africa. A lot of people think Africa is mud huts and fucking, war-torn countries. It's not. Africa is a beautiful continent. And I'm not saying that, there's a safari and some lions. Yeah, some places. There are beautiful cities. There are beautiful cities that would make you think you were in New York or something. You know what I mean? Like, well, maybe not New York, but like you get my drift. Like there are some very beautifully developed cities there. If you've been there, but if you haven't been there, you listen to these morons, you think. HY saying he was joking, but went way too far. What's the joke? What's the joke? Is South Sudan the joke or is the United States the joke? I think the US education is the joke. I think the US math scores are the joke. I think this type of ignorance towards foreigners and towards, countries that have, frankly, South Sudan was not a country 13 years ago. The fact that Luol Deng, fantastic person, once again, I say it again and again, he's such a fantastic human being. The fact that he has done such a great job, the fact that they fought so hard, the fact that they lost right at the buzzer, Team USA, that's such a beautiful moment, you motherfucker, and you take it away with shit like this. I want you to imagine, for real, that you are a Sudanese kid who hears this, and then you see your friends laughing. How is your perspective shaped? Yesterday, as I mentioned, at 4 a.m., I just sometimes when I'm up late or if I get up early, I just tune into Ox's graveyard shift, because sometimes I just see if it's going, some talk about whatever. They talk about some real stuff. They talk about basketball. They talk about a lot of stuff on there. And then I happened to come into this conversation and I just wanted to call in and talk about it. And they were talking about, one person was demanding reparations and one person was vehemently against it. One person was talking about Black Wall Street. The other person was talking about slavery, and a lot of stuff, really comes up to the surface when you start talking about stuff like this. And of course, this notion of the Black experience. What is that? Is a Jamaican person the same as an African American person, the same as a Ghanaian person, the same thing as a Nigerian person? Certainly nobody thinks that other than probably white people. But two things to end this live that I think can be pivotal and can shift perspectives. Number one, the concept of the self-looking glass. One person brought up a particularly triggering point, which almost always comes up in debates like this about they brought up black on black crime and then they brought up the crime stats. Number one, I will say this to anyone who's ever brought up, well, why can't black people control their own community, black on black crime, blah blah blah. The race baiting on this is so obvious. Ask yourself the question: have you ever heard of white on white crime? What's embezzlement? What's fraud? There's a lot of white people defrauding white people, and I don't never think I've ever heard of white on white crime ever in my life. So what the fuck is up with that? Is that not something we could talk about? I never heard of Indian on Indian crime. I've never heard that. It's only black people who get accused of, not doing enough to protect themselves. So I think that that's pretty stupid. Number one. Number two, crime stats. I think I've shared this story on this live before, on a different live, when I talked about how my boy and we used to hustle Dollarama because the security guard only honed in on the black kids. Well, guess what? If you only suspect black kids, you're only going to arrest black kids. And if you're only going to arrest black kids, then black people are going to be overrepresented. If you marginalize people, if you isolate people, you put people in the worst situations. You know what I want to say? As a human being, I can never judge someone who joined a gang. Ever. I can never judge them. I can judge a system that made that kid feel like joining a gang was his only option. You have to live this shit. You can't just contextualize it. You can't read 6 books and be like, well, they should have made better choices, those dumb immigrants. No, that's not fair. That's not fair at all. And I understand the pull them up by the bootstraps approach and everything, but if you've actually lived any of this, you realize that it's not so easy. It's not so easy. And frankly, certain people are way more predisposed towards being violent. Some people are way more predisposed to being addicted. The other day, I was on the bus, okay? And there was a 3-year-old girl drinking Coca-Cola, her second Coca-Cola on that bus. And she dropped it and it fell all over my foot and I helped her pick it up and stuff. And it got me thinking, so what is happening to this child's brain drinking all this Coca-Cola, right? When you go, like I went to a lot of predominantly black schools and then, it's very, very different state, went to a very predominantly white school. I did not get the same level of education. Let me just be straight up with you on that one. Textbooks were different, facilities were different, basketball courts were different, everything was different. So here's my question to you. When you are growing up in a situation where everything in society is telling you that you are less than, your home is less than, everything is, your parents are less than, your culture is less than, everything is wrong. How can you not identify with that? How can you not start to let that impact your self-esteem? It can really erode away. And you can say, oh, it's up to the parents to teach them. But if society is teaching you to hate yourself, right? I gave the example on Ox's graveyard shift yesterday. You want imagine there's a building with 10 residents, right? They're all black. 5 of them are what maybe white America would consider upstanding citizens, right? They go to work every single day. They take care of their kids. They never touch drugs in their life, whatever. They're the quote unquote, upstanding. And then there's 5 people, 5 units, and they're loud. They're loud. There may be some violence. They do some drugs. They smoke some weed. You know what I mean? They listen to like really loud gangster rap music. Okay, so when the news camera comes, who are they showing on television? How are they representing the culture? And so the conversation extended into whoever has the means of controlling the message, right? Y'all remember Simu Liu? He's a Toronto-based actor who's become very, very big. He talked extensively. I actually knew Simu before he blew up on Facebook and stuff. We had a couple of debates and stuff. So I knew of him. I don't say like we were friends or anything, but I knew of him. And we debated a couple of times. And one of the things that he really talked about was how Asian people are represented in film as always this friend or unattractive. Like Asian men are represented that way, and how he wanted to change that. That was like a big quest for him to change that. And I get that. I fully get that. That's like if Indian people are always represented as the geeky friend, but never as the love interest, how does that shape your understanding of yourself as an East Indian person? If Muslim people are always represented as bad, or if Black people were always represented as criminals on television, and that's the TV you're watching because you're going to consume movies because you want to watch Batman just like everybody else. Well, if the person who looks like you is always the bad person, well, then how do you continue to see yourself? And so I talk about the self-looking glass, a sociological theory that effectively says that the way that other people see you comes to inform how you see yourself. So the question becomes, if everybody thinks that you're a threat, if you're someone who looks even like me, I'll guarantee you airport travel has not been fun for you for the last 25 years. Dark hair, dark skin, dark features. Yeah, people look at you a little funny, right? I remember very clearly. I'm gonna share this with you. I think for the first time ever, and I didn't take it too bad, but it hurt my feelings a little bit. Okay, I remember going down to the Tampa Jewish Film Festival. Okay, I was watching a movie called The Cake Maker, and I was very disheveled. I had a very long flight, and very weirdly, I was wearing a toque in I think it was April and mid-May. Like, I don't even know why I was wearing a toque. I felt like it was keeping me safe or something in Florida. Okay. So I looked really weird for sure. And I didn't have a chance to check into my hotel. So I had like a really big bag with me. Right. So I'm looking really disheveled. I had a red eye flight because I was cheap as hell and I wanted to take the flight. And I didn't want to check into my hotel because I was cheap as well. So again, like just a really weird travel, not planned well. And I killed some time by going to the Tampa Jewish Film Festival. I show up there. No one says anything to me. No one says hi to me. I'm not in a particularly social mood because I'm feeling kind of like I look like shit. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to watch this movie. I took a $45 Uber to get there because nothing's close to anything in Florida at all. I go into this theater and I sit down in the second row. Bro, they stopped the movie. They stopped the movie because 4 people complained that I might have been a terrorist. And they forced me to open my bag in front of the entire theater to make sure there wasn't anything in there. That was very offensive. That was very offensive. And there was a lot of well-meaning white people who were like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And I was just like, "No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." But if that had happened to me when I was 16 years old and not when I was 31, I might have felt very different about it. You know what I mean? If I was Muslim, I might have felt really different about it. When you get stopped at an airport, now I've never been stopped at an airport. I just want to be clear about that. Air travel has been very fun for me because I have never had someone stop me, and I've been very blessed on that one. But like I see people getting stopped, and those random security checks are not random at all. Not Donald Fagan saying you look white as fuck to me though. I'm not saying it was racial profiling, bro. I'm saying I was tanned as hell. I mean, every Italian, Eastern European person will tell you this. When you're tanned and you have dark skin, dark hair, people mistake you for different things. People mistake you for Middle Eastern. You take a Mexican person or, a Spanish person, sometimes they get mistaken for Middle Eastern or all this stuff, right? If you're not blonde hair or blue eyes, you're never immune to any of this, right? So I'm not saying it was racial profiling or anything. I maybe looked a little weird and I had a really big bag that I was carrying in the theater. Okay. I fully understood it. I didn't like it, but I understood it. My point is that if you are a black kid or a brown kid or a person of color and you are stopped routinely by the cops, what are you learning about yourself? What information are you giving about yourself? When you take, for instance, if you have a racist teacher, and I don't say racist as in like she's outwardly racist saying racist shit to you. I'm saying in her mind, she perceives you as being predisposed to being a bad student. She's going to give less attention to you. She's going to lower the expectation for you. She's going to clap for you because you get a C plus. Whereas if you were white, she might not clap for you if you get a C plus. She is informing you that she's expecting less of you because you are a minority. I had to deal with that as a person who came to America trying to learn a new language. They tried to lower the bar for me. They tried to lower the bar for me. Like, oh, you don't speak English. And I'm like, no, 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 no. You treat me like the kids who can speak English. When my parents died, people tried to lower the bar for me too. They're like, oh, it's okay if you get into addictions. It's okay if you drink a little. Your parents died. There's an excuse. I don't want excuses. Because when people start to look at you like the victim, they subconsciously start to lower the bar for you, right? It's fact, right? It's very important. Spooky Ghostwriter saying, I confess I mistook a Persian classmate for South American, and it took me 3 years to learn that he wasn't South American. That's funny. Ripio saying, Rob being an immigrant background really aids him in understanding in a way of life that isn't traditional for most Westerners. Facts, because I'm not a Westerner, right? In fact, yesterday I blew Ox's mind and everyone's mind by telling them where the word slavery comes from. Do you know where the word slavery comes from? To anyone out there who might find this information useful for a Jeopardy contest or something, it comes from my people, Slavs, Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, it's literally in the word. Slave comes from the word Slavs. Slavs are Eastern Europeans, people like Romanians and Bulgarians, specifically Slavs, Serbians. Serbians, who else categorizes as Slavs? South Slavs specifically, you know? So yeah, so in that region of Eastern Europe is typically Montenegro, Serbia, etc., right? Russians, like there's like that's the Slavic people, right? So that's typically what, people was slave, right? So anyways, so what I wanted to say was self-looking glass dictates that the way people look at you will change how you see yourself. It is very important when people look at you the wrong way to Zero Sum saying Montenegro is Slavic as well. Correct. Yes. So what is important to realize here is that the way people look at you constantly shapes how you see yourself. My life changed because a writer's craft teacher decided to see me as worthwhile because I had occasionally, the votes of confidence I've had in my life are so far and in between, right? A teacher in grade 6 who saw potential in me, an uncle who thought that I could be more. And I promise I took every ounce of like faith that people showed in me and I paid it back 100 times over. But there were very few voices in my life telling me that I could be anything more than garbage. I made a film literally called Better Than Garbage because it's just how I was conditioned to believe that if you live in the ghetto, if you're an immigrant, your parents aren't rich, everyone's broke around you, you got pee in the elevator, you're trash. That's what you hear. And that's not a specific black problem, by the way. Just an FYI to anyone who thinks that. If you look at the minorities versus income brackets in the United States, you will see that the very top income bracket is a minority group, which is Jewish Americans. Right after that is East Indian Americans, right? So people from India. Right at the very bottom is Black Americans. White people are in the middle. So if you think being white American means that you get like $1 million a year or some shit like that, you are sadly mistaken. A lot of poor white people in the United States, a lot. And so that's the bigger thing, right? But they're called trash too. Just an FYI. The Western elites don't like anybody. They don't like black people. They don't like poor white people. They don't like Mexicans. They don't like anybody. They tell you they like everybody. They don't like anybody. They just like money. That's my read on it. So if someone's ever called you trash, the most important thing that you can do is to lose it, wipe it, and never ever identify with it. The second thing, which is less perhaps controversial and heated, is something called the rule of thirds. Now, if you're a filmmaker like myself, or if you're a photographer, you've definitely heard of the rule of thirds. Basically, the rule of thirds is draw a line, divide vertical plane and horizontal plane by 3. And typically, you want your pictures, like you want your subjects, to be hitting those angles. That's the only rule of third I've ever heard of in my life until I came across an Instagram reel yesterday talking about a very different rule of thirds. And it was very interesting. It was an Olympic athlete. I believe she was American or Canadian. I can't remember. She was a gymnast. And she was talking about the rule of thirds. And I was like, why is she talking about photography? She wasn't talking about photography. For her, the rule of thirds was that whenever you are doing something that you are pursuing with any fervor or seriousness or passion, that a third of the time you're supposed to love it, a third of the time it's supposed to be just okay, and a third of the time it's supposed to be horrible. The most important thing is that you always show up. That's it. That's success. I've been looking for a very, very long time to sum up the formula to success. I've read a lot of books about it. That sums it up about as well as I possibly could imagine. If you think about it, we all have shit days. I've had days where I don't want to do a live. I've had days where I didn't want to go to work. I've had days. And a lot of times I gave into those days. I just didn't do it. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I messed up, and that's okay too. But what I'm saying is, I own up to the fact that I haven't always lived up to my commitments, haven't always lived up to my promises, haven't always done what I know was the right thing to do. But successful people, like your Scotty Barnes of the world, they do. They show up all the time. There's a quote that has often gone around from Greg Popovich, I believe, where he said, Tim Duncan was never late for a bus, never late for a plane, never late for a practice. In 20 years, he was never late once. And that type of consistency is very easy to take for granted, but that's also why Tim Duncan was so great. I went somewhat viral on a Player's Choice video, I want to say 4 months ago, when I got clipped for not putting Kobe in my top 10, and I put Tim Duncan in my top 5. I put Bill Russell at number 2. And I'm very happy that that video went as viral as it did, because after that video went viral with, again, 1.92 million views, I started to hear a lot more about Tim Duncan. Because while I made some pretty valid points about Arvydas Sabonis towards the end of there, I think the most valid point that I have been trying to make for the last 10 years is that Tim Duncan deserves to be considered a top 5 player of all time. And I feel he's often missed in that list. And the fact that he is very out of sight and out of mind and doesn't do a lot of media interviews, I always wondered if one of my favorite players growing up would become effectively forgotten despite being such a great player. He led 20 years or 19 years of the most consistent, beautiful team, I think, in NBA history. And he deserves a ton of credit for it. Anyways, thank you so much to all of you. Spiro Contest saying, I've had some person ask me when I was in high school before if I was Asian. I'm European and pale as fuck. My whole school back then stuck to guessing people's heritage, which is annoying. Yeah, why is that a thing in Canada? I never noticed that too much in the United States, but I noticed that a lot when you come here and you don't look white. Like when I say white, I mean like blonde, white, blonde hair, red hair, blue eyes. People always ask you where you're from. Like even if you're white as hell, but you have some distinct feature, like very, very sharp, black eyes or something like that, people will be like, where are you from? What's in you? Is there a little bit Asian in you? Is there a little bit black in you? This is the most uninteresting question to ask someone, Like I've worked with someone for 2 years. 2 years. I still don't know where the hell she's from. Never thought to ask. Don't care. Right? It doesn't matter. So, yeah. I was going to say something else. Thank you so much, by the way, to all of you who've been supporting this. The last video went crazy. Like crazy. Like I never imagined that live would go 13,000. I have reached out to the director of the NBA Africa Academy, Joe, to see if he would do an interview with us. We'll see if he responds, if he sees it. I don't know. DMs are hit or miss on Instagram, but we'll see if he does. G-Man saying, in Canada, we all come from somewhere, parents, grandparents, etc. No one has ever cared. Brainwashing campaign kept keeping people divided. Agreed. Yeah, so, regardless of what side of the political aisle you stand on, there's no advantage or benefit to becoming more divided as a people. And when I say a people, I mean as human beings, right? And that divide exists within, brown communities and black communities and whatever. And I think that there's something very wrong and very dehumanizing when someone says to me, all you Eastern Europeans need to stick together. Says who? Says you? Why? I find it very crazy when someone tries to put a person from Ghana and a person from Jamaica and try to convince themselves or convince the kids themselves that they're the same. They are not the same. There's a very different heritage just because you think they're the same. But Lord help you if you confuse an Irish person for a Scottish person, you get like a 20-minute lecture about it, right? I think it matters who determines our goalposts in life. I think it matters who determines who we're putting on television. And the more times we choose to put Paul Pierce on television and Gilbert Arenas on television and people like that, they are doing the bidding for somebody else. And to those two specifically, and people, anyone like them, anyone who has allowed themselves to become a caricature or become a clown in that sense, you're not helping anybody by doing that. You're not, you know, it might go viral. It might be a ratings draw for you to talk some shit about South Sudan. People might find it funny for 10 seconds, but how can you hurt someone that way? It's crazy. Razor 28 saying, did you grow up in Toronto? I moved here when I was 14 years old, 14, 15. So yeah, I guess I did grow up here as well. But I always believe that you grow up where, you know, you learn to walk, sort of. So I would say I grew up more in Europe and the United States than here. Starred Jacob Isaac, appreciate you, brother. $10 super chat, appreciate it so much. Thank you to everyone who has generously supported through the e-transfers and through the Amazon wish list. My girlfriend's like, why are you just keep hoarding all these Amazon wish list things? They're all piling up in one place. I'm like, man, I gotta spend a weekend and just fix this studio up. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So the Amazon wish list has been a huge monumental success. This e-transfer stuff has been a huge success. Thank you to everybody. And, you know, thank you to the last e-transfer, the really big one that is allowing me to buy a computer and, you know, fix the camera and, you know, I've been working off a 2011 Mac, bro. It's not because I'm necessarily poor. It's partially because I'm very financially cautious. And yeah, I just want to say, like, thank you. And this means a lot to me. The outpouring of support is not taken for granted. And you know, if you read the last community post, you understand why I do this, right? And I've always believed that why you do things will determine how well you do things, right? And so, you know, if you do things selfishly, if you do things for yourself, and I'm not saying there's anything necessarily even wrong with that. I'm just saying if the only person that you're trying to feed is you, and if the only person you're trying to benefit is you, well, that's kind of boring, personally. My great advocacy for this channel was Scotty Barnes. You know, when I started it, it was so that what happened to Vince wouldn't happen to Scotty. And I wanted to make sure that we could get ahead of all the media crap that was coming because I saw it from a mile away. When I heard the first presser that he had, I could be like, they're gonna do something to this kid, man. He's too good, he's too pure, he's too honest. And I just felt that. And so now it's become something different and it's become a place where we can have really incredible discussions. And I hope that we can just continue to grow and get even better. So thank you. Yeah. Spiro saying, have a good night. Have a good night, man. Are you going to watch college basketball this season? Absolutely. 100%. And I want to say the next 3 drafts, based on what I watched of the Peace Jam, are like, oh my God, bonkers, insanity. Like really, really, really talented 3 draft class. And I know that we sometimes get way too excited about this draft class and this draft class, and then this prospect ends up being a bust, and that prospect ends up being a bust. I'm telling you, man, the next batch of kids coming up, like, stock up on draft picks, bro. 2025, 26, 27, 28. These 4 years. I don't know anything about 2030 because those kids are basically in grade 6 right now. But those 3-4 years, those next 3-4 years, it is going to be so critical to draft well and draft high. Scroopy Hoopers. Bro, I can't even talk about high schoolers without you coming up here. That's so funny. Like, you're hilarious. Have you seen any no, I haven't. Retro Jasper saying Mike Williams in the top 20. We'll talk about that. We would definitely talk about, you know, prospects coming up and whatever. I had about, I want to say, a day to scour through through the Peach Jam stuff. I focused a lot of my attention on that next year's prospect class and AJ Debanza. So he looks legit. Cool. And 905 should be awesome. And if you follow us on Instagram, I put out a list of the 5 Division 1 female basketball players y'all should be following this year. And yeah, basketball is very alive. Not even to mention the Olympics. So this is a great time to be a basketball fan. I can't wait. We're going to definitely do some Olympics coverage on this channel for sure. I'm going to have really detailed notes for you guys. And yeah, I'm going to try to keep doing what I was doing with the Summer League, where I take like clips and clips of certain things that I want to talk about on the live. I think that was a really good idea and something that I want to continue. All right. The most fun part of next year, to be honest, are the prospects who aren't bona fide like lottery picks, but still have some unique qualities that give them some sort of X factor for the development. Absolutely. And I think the most important thing would be the fact that the Raptors have shown themselves, at least over the last year, to be turning their development program around. I mean, can you imagine being a team like OKC where you just have this faith that whatever you draft is going to be a little bit better because you drafted them and developed them? That'll be great. All right. Hopefully, some good news on Christian Coloco soon. I'll talk to y'all later. And again, Jacob Isaac, thanks a lot for the super chat, bro.